Mnar Adley, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
You, of course, are the founder of MintPress News. And I wanted to have you on today because you are one of several different organizations and journalists who have been recently kicked off of PayPal in the latest wave of censorship that has been spreading across independent media. But before we get to that, I just wanted to familiarize anybody who may not know about MintPress News or may not be familiar with yourself. Could you kind of give us the backstory on you, how you became a journalist, and how you founded this news organization?
Sure. Well, actually, this year marks our 10-year anniversary at MintPress News, and I am the founder. I am the editor-in-chief, and mostly the news director of all of our video projects. And the way MintPress started actually goes back to me being a Palestinian American who, although I was born and raised here in America, my parents moved us back to Jerusalem to live where they come from originally. And I lived there and lived under Israeli occupation and apartheid for about 4 years as a preteen. So I was there from the ages of 9 to about 12 years old. And the situation was very bad. So we had to move back to America. We were already pretty Americanized. And so because of just living an American lifestyle before, we couldn't handle living under the occupation. And so having witnessed pretty grave human rights abuses and going to school with at many times where half of my class was not present in the classroom because they were blocked from Israeli checkpoints, from reaching the schools, having our water cut off, our electricity cut off, and just witnessing how the occupation is engaging in racist apartheid policies, blocking Palestinians whom are both Muslim and Christian from, praying at their mosques, at their churches, and just being able to be free. There's no free movement in Palestine if you are Palestinian. So Israel is an apartheid state. It's a military proxy state of the US empire, and it is a police state by all descriptions of a police state. It is a totalitarian police state. And so this was pretty eye-opening for me and life-changing as a preteen. And so when we had moved back to America, to the pristine suburbs of Minneapolis, Minnesota, I had now witnessed a stark contrast in the way that people were living overseas, living under the boot of colonialism and militarism, to just how calm and serene life is in America, where people just really have no idea what is happening around the world. And so I had suffered from PTSD from what I had witnessed, and my mind was constantly racing. I had anxiety from all of the wars that I had, the war intensity that I had lived through. I even witnessed as a child, as a preteen, jets shooting down, bombs on houses in Ramallah. So that war scene became pretty standard and familiar, unfortunately, for myself as a child. And so I had turned to the media in America to see how the media was covering Israel and Palestine. And of course, that was my first experience with propaganda and how it worked. The way the media presented the crisis was through a sectarian lens, through a religious lens. It presented Israel as a beacon of democracy and Palestinians as terrorists, Muslim women being oppressed. And as the Palestinians were backwards, and they're all basically representatives of Hamas. And very soon after this, 9/11 happened. And so I had then witnessed the corporate mainstream media beating the drums of war. And so just all of these things combined, that trauma and this way of living in a post 9/11 world as a Muslim American Palestinian, and just seeing how the media operates to dehumanize the victims of our war, that became the driving force in myself to want to pursue journalism. And so from there, I was 13 years old at the time when I made that decision to pursue journalism. But from there and forward, I pursued journalism and founded MintPress when I was 24 years old. I'm now 34, where we hit our 10-year anniversary. But yeah, this is how MintPress was born. It was through living under occupation. And so part of our mission at MintPress has always been to expose the profiteers of the permanent war state. And through that, we have identified the special interest groups, the lobby groups, the weapons manufacturers, and how they influence the media And now with the rise of big tech, one of our biggest issues that we cover is how big tech is partnering and working hand in hand with the military industrial complex, with NATO funded think tanks, with the ADL and others to crack down on any sort of alternative information. And I know that's why we're here, what we're here to talk about today.
Yeah, and again, so you were one of several different organizations and individuals who was banned off of PayPal in the span of less than a week. Both MintPress and I believe yourself and other individuals at MintPress were banned, as well as Caleb Maupin and Consortium News. So again, did you receive any kind of information as to why you were banned, either you individually or MintPress? Did you speak to anybody at PayPal, or just were you given any sort of explanation at all?
Well, last week is when I initially received the first message from PayPal, which notified me that my account poses potential risk. Literally, that was the reason given. It was like a very short sentence, very vague, nothing specific. And because of my account posing potential risk, that we could no longer use PayPal permanently, and that any funds that we have are going to be held for 180 days. And so that's when I sounded the alarm, went on Twitter and screenshotted the email and let everybody know that we had been banned. And just the same day, Caleb Maupin, he's another independent journalist, he announced that he had been banned. And then I believe it was the next day, we found out that Consortium News, which is a legendary, one of the oldest independent media outlets in America, founded by the late Robert Perry, who exposed the Iran-Contra affair, that website was also banned permanently from PayPal. And then actually just 2 days ago, we all received a notice that our account is still banned from PayPal, but we could now access our funds and transfer them over to our bank accounts. And so while it is a small victory for us to be able to access our own funds, I think the reason PayPal made that adjustment, I really do believe, is because of just the swell of support and outrage that people expressed online to what PayPal had done, because this is really, it sets a very dangerous precedent that a big tech financial giant like PayPal could seize the accounts, the money of accounts of independent dissenting journalists. And so Jacobin covered the story. I was interviewed by multiple radio stations. Matt Taibbi covered the story, even CoinDesk covered the story, to talk about how we can't rely on these big tech giants, we have to turn to cryptocurrency. And although we do already accept cryptocurrency at MintPress, we were still using PayPal to make payments towards our investigative journalists across the country. I mean, it's a pretty easy app to use. And so we were using it to make payments, but we were also receiving a lot of donations and a lot of monthly membership dues through PayPal. So it did play an integral role at MintPress. We've been using it for 10 years, so it's extremely disappointing, but yet it's a reminder that we cannot rely on these big tech giants to send money or to share information. I mean, PayPal banning myself and MintPress and our senior staff writer, Alan McLeod, and Consortium and Caleb Maupin. I think there's another, I forgot the other website that was banned. But this is blatant censorship of dissenting journalists and outlets. And there's no question that we were targeted because MintPress for the past decade has been unapologetically working as a watchdog journalism outlet to expose the profiteers of the permanent war state. From the wars in Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, to apartheid Israel's occupation of Palestine, to Saudi Arabia's genocidal war in Yemen, to the many regime change operations that the United States engages in Syria, Ukraine, and Venezuela, where US weapons have flooded these nations to plunge them into devastating civil wars. And in the case of Ukraine, they're landing in the hands of literal Nazis. In Syria, they were landing in the hands of like Al-Qaeda, of Al-Nusra Front. And so in the era of a declining US empire, it's obvious that censorship has become the last resort of an unpopular regime, and it's forever wars to make the truth disappear and critical thinking all but dead. And because we've now entered wartime, the war in Ukraine is raging on. We have the mainstream corporate media, which is not even mainstream anymore. It's an extremist corporate media that is beating the drums of war. We've entered wartime. They're promoting NATO. They're promoting the interests of the military industrial complex. They're promoting nuclear war. I mean, just a couple of days ago, the Wall Street Journal published an article calling on the United States to show Russia that it can win a nuclear war. Like, no one can win a nuclear war. I mean, that's like calling for the complete annihilation of all of humanity. So it's really, really disturbing what we're seeing. And so big tech giants, including PayPal, are working hand in hand with the new Cold War architects themselves to sanction dissenting journalists. And if you read the board of any of these tech giants, from Google, Twitter, Facebook, to even PayPal, they read like a rogue gallery of warmongers and criminals. And their agenda is clear. It's to control the free flow of information and to target the bank accounts of anyone who dares question the official line of the State Department and the Pentagon.
So prior to this, have you ever had any issues with PayPal? Because when I spoke with Caleb Maupin, he had mentioned that I guess if people had gotten donations that made any sort of reference to Iran or Cuba, that they would have those transactions blocked. Has anything ever happened with PayPal before where MintPress or you were not able to access funds or get donations from somebody?
No, we've actually never had this kind of experience, but what Caleb Maupin said is absolutely correct. We're not the first, but PayPal has been found in the past to block funds being transferred if, like, in the description, the words Iran is in there. Even the words Cuban sandwich can get flagged to be blocked. And I think this really is a testament that these tech giants are basically working to starve independent and any sort of dissenting journalists, the same way that they're starving countries like Russia, Iran, Zimbabwe, Cuba, Venezuela, and over 25% of the world's population through its maximum pressure campaign, through its sanctions regime to target them. And so that's what we're seeing happening against, MintPress and others. So, and I just want to mention too that what we're seeing now, this kind of financial censorship, we really saw the blueprint created for this back in 2010 when WikiLeaks was the first to be blocked by PayPal. And at that time, PayPal received direct orders from the US government to censor and sanction WikiLeaks and block WikiLeaks from receiving any sort of donations through PayPal. And in 2012, an EU parliamentary resolution criticized providers like PayPal for its arbitrary economic sanctions. So we are definitely not the first. WikiLeaks was the first victim. We always have that saying, like, first they came for Assange. Well, it's true. In this case, first they came for Assange, and now they're coming after other American independent journalists. But that basically opened up the floodgates, the kind of censorship we're now seeing against other dissenting journalists.
Yeah, and also, I mean, I think after that too, I mean, the way that they deplatformed, and I believe that PayPal did this with the dissident right at one point too, with people like Alex Jones and Nick Fuentes. It seems as though they really go after the most objectionable people first, and then sort of like tighten the noose and start going after more and more people, which just raises the question, for a lot of liberals out there, I wonder, at what point will they start realizing that this sort of censorship will eventually come after them?
Absolutely. And what you're saying is correct. I mean, they're going after questionable figures like Alex Jones first, but it's all really to set up the stage to censor anti-war voices, dissenting voices, and basically anyone critical of US imperialism, policies, and even those who criticize the police state. I mean, we saw in 2016 during the presidential election between Hillary Clinton and Donald Trump, that's when we really started to see the censorship campaign against dissenters really taking place, when Hillary Clinton blamed her defeat to Donald Trump on Russia. She blamed the reason why she lost the elections on Putin and Russian bots and Russian disinformation. And that's when we really saw the rise of this partnership between big tech giants and NATO-funded think tanks like the Atlantic Council. And when Hillary Clinton kind of sounded the alarm about this, of course, it was all fake, right? You know, she didn't lose because of Russian disinformation, but that really became the launch pad to the kind of censorship that we're seeing today. And we also saw what was born out of that was Prop or Not, which stands for propaganda or not. And what Prop or Not said at the time in 2006, after the 2016 election, is that if you criticize Obama, if you criticize Hillary Clinton, if you even are critical of NATO or even the mainstream media, or even express any worry about a nuclear war with Russia, Prop or Not at that time said that you must be a Russian disinformation agent. And Prop or Not created this list of alternative and independent media outlets like MintPress, because MintPress was on there, Consortium News at the time was on there, Black Agenda Port was on there, I believe even Chris Hedges was on that list of media outlets, but we were all clumped in to another list, to other organizations on that list that were very far right, some of them even conspiratorial, kind of along the Alex Jones crowd, and they kind of clunked us all together. And the reason why that article was so important is because the Washington Post published this list of outlets and people by Prop or Not. It was like they published a press release from this Prop or Not org, which, by the way, at that time, there was no information about who Prop or Not was, or what their agenda was, or who founded them. You couldn't find any information about them, but their agenda was very clear. It was to target dissenting voices. And so after this was published by the Washington Post, Facebook purged I would say about 90% of every single outlet and individual that was on that list by Prop or Not. And we actually conducted an investigation into Prop or Not, and we discovered that we believe that Prop or Not is controlled by the Interpreter magazine, which Michael Wise is an editor of, and he created the Interpreter magazine. But if you look at Prop or Not, we believe that Michael Wise is the founder of Prop or Not. And who is Michael Wise? I mean, he's a non-resident senior fellow of the NATO think tank, the Atlantic Council. And so clearly there is a conflict of interest here about who Prop or Not is and what their agenda is and what they're pushing for this kind of censorship, and the way that corporate mainstream media is supporting and basically acting as a mouthpiece for an outlet, a really shady organization that we're like more than 99% sure was founded by Michael Wise. And so that's why we really have to be careful about supporting any sort of censorship, especially, by the establishment left. They are basically acting as an arm of the surveillance capitalist state. And one of the outcomes as well, apart from Facebook purging at that time thousands of websites and individuals from social media, I'm sure you remember that big purge. Mm-hmm. Google then launched in 2017 what is called Project Owl, which was a massive overhaul of its algorithm. And so it claimed that it was purely a measure to stop foreign fake news from taking over the internet. And what this resulted in is like outlets like MintPress and Consortium News, while we were not purged, our organic Google traffic declined by 90%. And that's what the results have been from this censorship campaign since then.
So as far as partnership with the government, I think it's fairly clear that that's happening, right? I mean, you have obviously the connections between the US government and the Atlantic Council, or with Bellingcat. But just beyond that, like the coordination that it would take between these companies that are nominally competitors, you talk about somebody getting kicked off of YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter at the same time, that seems to suggest that something is encouraging that, and likely the government. Also in Matt Taibbi's article that he wrote about you getting kicked off of PayPal, he mentioned that PayPal has an explicit partnership with not just the ADL, but also the US government to identify problematic people who are using their platform. So from my perspective, this seems to raise a real free speech issue. If it is the United States government who is telling private companies to deplatform people, that seems to be a direct violation of the First Amendment. So do you think that there's any way to really uncover that, like either through like a Freedom of Information Act request or through like a class action lawsuit? Because again, it seems like it's clearly happening. And again, I think like the Disinformation Governance Board, the fact that this has been recently announced, that seems to also point to the fact that the government is directing people to be silenced. So again, like, do you think that there is possibly like a lawsuit or something that could push back on this?
Well, there are many lawsuits that are taking place against these big tech giants, but we have to remember that these big tech giants are financed with billions upon billions of dollars. And so they have multiple lawyers working on these cases and a very, very big budget against, small outlets that are trying to go after big tech. And so, I mean, I am hopeful that if we push back enough that we can win this. But I think the most unfortunate thing is that the establishment liberal class is actually at the forefront of pushing for these big tech giants to crack down on Russian disinformation or like neo-Nazism online or white supremacy online, even though it kind of contradicts some of the things that they say about other issues. Something that I want to talk about too is that, I mean, it really is no secret. You're right. It's not a secret that the US government is working directly with these big tech giants. I mean, if you look at like NewsGuard, for example, and I'll talk about the Ministry of Truth as well, but if you look at NewsGuard, it was launched a couple of years ago. And we actually at MintPress, myself and Whitney Webb, we actually are the ones who investigated NewsGuard and brought people's attention to NewsGuard. It's a browser plugin that is literally founded by and directed by former CIA Director Michael Hayden, former Secretary of Homeland Security Tom Ridge, and self-described chief propagandist for the Obama State Department, Richard Engel. And their agenda has been to use NewsGuard to rank news websites based on the fact that if they're fake news or trustworthy or untrustworthy. And these people are basically the architects of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, and even the crisis that we're seeing in Ukraine today. They are the architects and the people that wrote the Patriot Act. I mean, these people represent the surveillance state, the national security state. They worked in government. And now they've launched this ranking app, a ranking browser plugin called NewsGuard. And they're trying to get NewsGuard in all technological devices in this country. And eventually they want to make it a global system of ranking. And so there's a very deep conflict of interest here that we should all be concerned about. NewsGuard is already in all public, in the computers of, by default, in US public libraries in many states. And they're pushing to get this in all schools and universities and basically all smartphones and computers in the United States. And one of their partners is actually Microsoft. And so why this is concerning is because if you look at the way they rank websites, first of all, they've already ranked the majority of independent smaller outlets with a red rating, which is basically like you are untrustworthy, while giving a green rating to outlets like Voice of America. Voice of America is funded by the Board of Broadcasting Governors, which is funded by US taxpayer money, and it acts as a legal propaganda arm of the US government around the world. It pushes a US agenda around the world. And they've given NewsGuard has given Voice of America a green check mark while giving MintPress a red rating. And of course, they've given RT a red rating as well, but they've given Al Jazeera and the BBC green ratings. And so, like, we cannot trust NewsGuard in this sense to help us differentiate what is real news and what is fake news. NewsGuard actually partnered up with Gallup and conducted a study that showed that if a website has a green check mark, it's passed basically NewsGuard's rating system and it's considered trustworthy, that 100% of the people are willing to share that article or that website. But if a website has received a red rating, which is like MintPress, and now they've targeted consortium news and they're going after the gray zone, which I think they're going to end up listing them as untrustworthy, then 60% of people are not willing to share that. So it is a game of psychology here. And eventually, if you get ranked red, NewsGuard is also going to go after and lobby financial institutions to block advertising and sponsorship to your website because you're considered not trustworthy. So huge conflict of interest here. And it is really scary to think that this could make it to all public libraries, all smartphone devices and computers across the country. The EU, so NewsGuard actually approached the EU a couple of years ago and tried to present this to the EU. And the EU actually, a representative within the EU cited MintPress's investigation and cited that this could affect free speech and First Amendment issues for, and freedom of press issues in the European Union. And so they raised it at that time. I don't know where it has gone since then, but because we've entered wartime and now we've seen even the EU ban RT and target alternative news outlets and individuals, we could see the EU kind of turn around and say, okay, NewsGuard, we're going to allow NewsGuard to be made in the EU. So it's something definitely to look out for.
So just last question, you mentioned Julian Assange. Obviously, he is still in prison and waiting extradition to the US. And I think with the announcement of this Disinformation Governance Board last week, that kind of raised a lot of red flags for a lot of folks about the US government effectively engaging in censorship. And the director of the DHS kind of pushed back on that and said that's not what they're going to be doing. But I mean, what other point would there be for that board? So again, I think a lot of folks, if you just look at the trend of what's been happening with the demonization, the deplatforming, attacking people's finances, like what happened with you. Also last week, when you folks were getting kicked off of PayPal, there was a hit piece in the Daily Beast going after many different independent journalists and dissident leftists. And in that article, the author actually said that he contacted Patreon to get Max Blumenthal kicked off of Patreon. So, things are really reaching a fever pitch, again, as you said, in the backdrop of what's happening in Ukraine. Do you think that it is possible that folks could be getting prosecuted in the US for seditious behavior or things like that, conspiracy? Do you think that we could really reach, that level of neo-McCarthyism, or do you think that that's not realistic in the US currently?
That's a really good question. I really don't know the answer to that. I mean, it's very possible. I mean, the reason why WikiLeaks and Julian Assange were targeted by the US is because they're not Americans, and so but we don't know if how much this war against dissenters could escalate here in the United States. But with the prosecution of Julian Assange and him being in Belmarsh prison and having suffered a stroke and being put in solitary confinement, and just the way that he has been treated, he's been tortured. It really sets it. The US government is making an example of him to say, like, if you continue to toe this line, then this is what's going to happen to you. And so I don't know if it could happen to us at that rate, but it's very possible. Something that we really have to worry about is this new Disinformation Governance Board by the DHS, because that's kind of what people are thinking about, is that, could they target American citizens and prosecute them? But the Ministry of Truth, what we do know about it is that it is run by a cold warrior who has smeared independent media as Russian disinformation. They've described WikiLeaks in the same way as well, as Russian disinformation.
She called them scum, actually.
Yeah, and scum, and scum. But CIA Director William Burns admitted back in a Senate Intelligence Committee hearing in March that the United States is waging an information war on Russia, and boasted that it is Vladimir Putin losing this war. And I think that the war of information that they're talking about is really just here in the United States. It really, really is here, because we're living in an era of a declining US empire. And I've traveled overseas to many different countries. Most recently, I was in Venezuela. And, I can't speak for the world, but from the conversations that I've had with people, people around the world are tired of US hegemony. They're tired of being bullied by the US government. I mean, 25% of the world is now sanctioned by the US. Other countries that have been targeted by the United States have been, have felt the brunt of neoliberalism. And so those countries are suffering economic hardships where unemployment is extremely high and the rich are just getting richer and the working class are really, really suffering. And so, that's why this information war is being waged by the US government, is because they know they're losing the war overseas. More countries are now turning to align themselves with Russia and China, not because Russia and China are, perfect, but because they're offering a new vision for the future. They're offering, they're not offering war, they're not offering coups, they're not offering regime change, they're not offering bombs being dropped or, taking control of all of a country's resources, but they're offering rebuilding these countries, lifting people out of poverty. And we're entering really a new era of multipolarism. And this really terrifies the US government. And that's why we're seeing the US government literally bully all of these EU countries into staying in alignment with the US and with NATO, even though countries like Germany and France and Spain are suffering economically. The people there are really, really suffering economically, and they need gas and they are having an energy crisis. And so it's really disturbing to see how these countries have basically acted as as America's bitch, basically, to continue to working with the United States. And so this is the new Cold War that's taking place against both Russia and China. And that's why this disinformation, Ministry of Truth has been launched. It's like the last resort of an empire in decline. That's, and if you look at even our Wikipedia page, for example, I mean, it's been rewritten to just characterize and label MintPress as Russian disinformation, Jewish conspiracies, anti-Israel, anti-Saudi Arabia, like there's anything wrong with being anti-Israel and anti-Saudi Arabia. The way they want to just caricature to paint this caricature against independent journalists, it's like so ridiculous. None of our reporting is being challenged. And that's because we are successfully pushing through the propaganda machine. And that's why they're going after us and just labeling us. It's like we're in high school. They're just putting like labels on us to isolate us, to bully us, and to kind of push us in a corner so that we can kind of be pushed to toe the official government line.
Well, Mnar, I really appreciate you being on the show today and discussing all this. And again, I'm sorry that you're having to go through this this kind of persecution. But I think a lot of folks are paying attention, so hopefully we can fight back. For folks out there who would like to follow you and support you, how can they do that?
Well, thank you so much. So of course, everybody can visit our website at mintpressnews.com, and they can follow me on Twitter. I'm Mnar Adley on Twitter. And we also just recently launched a new video project called Behind the Headlines, and we're bringing back some of the most important dissenters to be in this project. Lee Camp has joined us. Dan Cohen has joined us, really incredible investigative journalists. And Lee Camp, as many people know, he's like the Bill Hicks of our time. He's one of the most important political comedians of our time, the most censored political comedian. And we're giving him a platform. And we have a fundraising drive right now on Indiegogo. And within 1 week, we have raised almost $30,000. But our goal is to raise $200,000 so that we can give Lee Camp and Dan Cohen full-time positions to produce weekly work. And so it's really important right now with this crackdown and witch hunt against dissenting journalism that we people put our money where our mouths are. There are more of us than there are more of them. And so we have to fund our own media to fight back and to push back. So we would appreciate any sort of support on social media and then also financially through this campaign. And of course, we do accept cryptocurrency on our website as well.
Well, thanks again, Mnar. I really do appreciate your time today, and hopefully I can have you back again sometime soon.
Sounds good. Thank you so much.